Magandiya Sutta. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So today the Magandiya Sutta, number 75 of the Majjhima Nikaya. Even though, as I said earlier, that I have read this out before, about 4 or 5 years ago, it is a nice sutta to read out again. Number one, it just shows that even though you're a Buddha, there's still people who criticize you and think bad of you, and how you deal with such criticism, and how there was a philosophical difference as well, that the person was very much into enjoying the world, and the Buddha was saying that no, he doesn't know what real pleasures are, and also making this marvelous little saying that Nibbana is the greatest bliss, the highest happiness, and the Eightfold Path is the best of all paths, and teaching this Magandiya in a very, very severe way, just the difference between sensual pleasures and the peace from the five senses, and giving him the very, very famous, one of my favorite similes, the simile of the blind man with a dirty piece of cloth. So it's many, many great similes. So this is going to be in the Magandiya Sutta, but also, because I have read this out before, I'm going to also say some background about Magandiya first of all, because there's another reason why this fellow Magandiya was not all that happy with the Buddha. So to tell you this, that I'm going to talk about another Magandiya, who apparently, according to the commentary, was the uncle of the Magandiya in this sutta over here. This Magandiya, he was a wanderer, a person who was almost into some sort of spirituality, but there was people from all different types of spiritual traditions in the time of the Buddha, just as they're in today. And we can see that his philosophy over there was just enjoying himself. But his uncle was a Brahmin of the Kuru country. This is the same area where the Buddha gives his talk. And this Magandiya, the uncle of the one who's the subject of this sutta, had a very beautiful daughter called Magandiya. And many men of high station sought her hand, but the Brahmin did not consider them worthy. The Buddha one day became aware that both Magandiya and his wife were ready to listen to the Dhamma, so he visited their village. Magandiya saw him, and noticing the auspicious marks on his body, told him of his beautiful daughter, and begged him to wait till she could be brought. The Buddha said nothing, and Magandiya went home and returned with his wife, and his daughter, arrayed in all splendor. In other words, he was trying to marry his daughter off to the Buddha, thinking that he was the only one worthy of such a beautiful daughter. And on arriving, they found the Buddha had gone, but his footprint was visible, and Magandiya's wife, skilled in such matters, said the owner of such a footprint was free from all passion. But Magandiya paid no attention, and going a little way, saw the Buddha and offered him his daughter. And the Buddha thereupon told, and I know you give us many offerings, but that's not the proper offering to offer to any monk, your daughter. So he offered him his daughter. And the Buddha thereupon told them of the Buddha's past life, his renunciation of the world, his conquest of Mara under the Bodhi tree, and even the unsuccessful attempts of Mara's very beautiful daughters to tempt him. And compared with them, Magandiya, the daughter of this guy, was, he said, a corpse filled with 32 impurities, an impure vessel painted without. He would not touch her with his foot. Now, sometimes, that's according to the commentary, sometimes that's not the right thing to say, as we'll find out later on. And at the end of this discourse, it was actually a good thing for the parents, because at the end of this discourse, apparently, Magandiya and his wife, they were ready to hear the Dhamma, they became non-returners. And so they couldn't marry the daughter off to the Buddha, but they listened to the teachings and they were really inspired. They understood them, and they sort of became anagamis, that's non-returners. And as for the daughter, it is said they gave their daughter into the charge of her uncle and retired from the world, and later on became arahats. But what happened to Magandiya is the next part of this story. This is the daughter who the Buddha rejected. Now, of course, when you call anybody someone who is a vessel of filth, what was it again? A vessel, he said, she was a corpse filled with 32 impurities, an impure vessel painted without, he would not touch her with his foot. She got quite understandably a bit upset, and she carried that with her for her whole life. So Magandiya, the daughter of the Brahmin Magandiya, when the Buddha rejected her father's offers of marriage with her, her parents joined the order, giving her in charge of her uncle. And the latter, her uncle took her to Udana, who was the king of Kosambi, who made her, he was quite interested in her, made her his chief consort. And Magandiya was incensed against the Buddha for having called her a vessel of filth. And when he came to Kosambi, she planned her revenge on the Buddha. Having discovered that Udana's other queen, Samawati, she was a very, very great disciple of the Buddha. And her companions, so Samawati and her companions were in the habit of watching for the Buddha through the windows in the walls of their rooms. So she told the king that this Samawati, one of the other queens, and her friends were conspiring to kill the king. For some time the king refused to believe this, but when the holes in the walls were shown to him, he had them closed up and the windows built higher. The plan having failed, Magandiya hired a slave to revile and abuse the Buddha in the streets. Ananda suggested to the Buddha they should go elsewhere, and the Buddha answered, I am like the elephant who has entered the battle. I must endure the arrows that come upon me. And after 7 days the abuse ceased. And Magandiya then persuaded her uncle to send 8 live chickens to the palace and sent a page with them to the king's drinking place. When the king asked what should be done with them, she suggested that Samawati and her friends should be asked to cook them for the king. Now, these were Buddhists and these were live chickens. So the king agreed to ask this, but the woman refused to deprive an animal of life. Magandiya said they should be tested and sent word by the page that the cooks were to be cooked for the Buddha. Were they not cooking the chickens because of their precepts, or was it because they wanted to cook the chickens for the Buddha himself? And what they actually did, this was a trick, on the way they exchanged the live chickens for dead ones. So Samawati and her companions then cooked them and sent them to the Buddha. So I was trying to prove that, they would do this for the Buddha, but not for the king. But even the king, though not knowing of the exchange, would not be convinced of Samawati's disloyalty. So then Magandiya obtained a snake from her uncle with its fangs removed, and she inserted it in the shell of the conch which Udana carried about, closing the hole with a bunch of flowers. Udana, the king, was in the habit of spending a week in turn with each of his 3 main queens. When he announced his intention of going to visit Samawati, this queen who was in trouble because she was a Buddhist, Magandiya begged of him not to go, saying she had a dream and feared for his safety. But the king went, and Magandiya went with him as he lay asleep with the conch under his pillow. She pulled out the bunch of flowers, and the snake lay coiled on the king's pillow. Magandiya screamed and accused Samawati of wanting to kill the king, and this time Udana believed her. And so he placed Samawati and her friends in a line, one after the other. And he sent for his bow and shot an arrow at Samawati's breast. But the arrow failed to pierce her. So that meant it was some psychic phenomena. So convinced of her innocence, the king pleaded for her forgiveness and gave her a boon. And she chose that the Buddha should be invited to come to the palace every day. But the Buddha would not accept the invitation. He sent Ananda in his place. And once more, Magandiya conspired with her uncle against Samawati. And so they couldn't get the king to kill them, so they decided to kill them themselves. They had all the pillars of Samawati's house wrapped in cloth, soaked in oil, and when Samawati and her attendants were inside, the house was set fire to. Samawati saw the flames spreading and exhorted her friends to be mindful and meditate, and apparently they attained to the various fruits of the path. Nudena questioned Magandiya very carefully and became convinced of her share and that of her uncle in the crime. He then sent for all Magandiya's relations, saying he wished to reward them. But they didn't reward them as they expected. He buried them waist deep in the palace grounds and covered them with straw, and then set fire to them. And when it was burnt, they had their bodies ploughed with an iron plough. And pieces of flesh were ripped from Magandiya's body, fried like cakes in oil, and the daughter, Magandiya, was forced to eat them. Yuck. So now it gives an idea of how that family Magandiya looked at the Buddha at the time. And sometimes it might explain some of the reason why. This would be that daughter's cousin, the wanderer Magandiya. But also I should say that during this, when we get to the real sutta here, please, because this is on air and because we haven't got that much time, people are only allowed 3 questions, no more than 3. And if you go more than 3, remember what might happen to you, according to Buddhist tradition, about you and your... That's a warning not to ask more than 3 questions. So anyway, thus have I heard, on one occasion the Blessed One was living in the Kuru country at a town of the Kurus named Kamasadama. And he was on a spread of grass in the fire chamber of a Brahmin belonging to the Bharadwaja clan. So this was a Buddha, and even the Buddha, he would just be on a spread of grass in the sort of a chamber which was just used for the ceremonial fire in this Brahmin's house. So he wouldn't have a sort of expensive bedding or anywhere. Even the Buddha would just sleep anywhere. Then when it was morning, the Blessed One, dressed and taking his bowl and outer robe, went into Kamasadama, the village or town, for alms food. And after he had wandered for alms in the town, had returned from his alms round after his meal, he went to a certain grove for the day's abiding. Having entered the grove, this little wood, he sat down at the root of the tree for the day's abiding. So he'd go and go for alms, meditate, go for alms, so he'd eat, and after eating, just go and spend the rest of the day in solitude, meditating. Then the wanderer Magandiya, this was a cousin of Magandiya, the lady who was a consort and got other people into trouble. Then the wanderer Magandiya, while walking and wandering for exercise, went to the fire chamber of the Brahmin belonging to the Bharadwaja clan. There he saw a spread of grass prepared and asked the Brahmin, "For whom has this spread of grass been prepared in Master Bharadwaja's fire chamber? It seems like a recluse's, like a monk's bed." "Master Magandiya, there is the monk Gotama, the son of the Sakyans, who went forth from a Sakyan clan. Now a good report of Master Gama has been spread to this effect. Iti piso bhagawa alahang samma sambuddho vija chavana sampano sukato loka vidu anutaro purisa dhammasarati satta deva manusanang buddho bhagawati. So you can see it translated there. And I say that because sometimes when we do this chanting, some people want to know where this chanting comes from. And it comes from these standard phrases here about the qualities of the Buddha. In English, the Blessed One is accomplished, fully enlightened, perfect in true knowledge and conduct, sublime, knower of the worlds, incomparable leader of persons to be tamed, teacher of gods and humans, enlightened, blessed. And he said, this bed has been prepared for that Master Gotama. Indeed, Master Bharadwaja, it is an ill sight we see when we see that bed of that destroyer of growth, Master Gotama. Now, it's very hard to translate a Pali word which is really putting somebody down into English, especially when people are trying to be polite when they write these translations. So the word, the destroyer of growth, really is some sort of negative, pessimistic person who doesn't really agree with normal ways of doing things. He destroys prosperity and growth. Because remember, the idea of prosperity and growth would be to get married, have kids, build up the business, get more finances, have the worldly success. And Buddhism, he said, was going in the opposite direction. So he's very upset. Indeed, Master Bharadwaja, it is an ill sight we see when we see the bed of that destroyer of growth, Master Gotama. Be careful what you say, Magandiya. Be careful what you say. Many learned nobles, Brahmins, householders and recluses have full confidence in Master Gotama and have been disciplined by him in the noble true way, in the Dharma that is wholesome. Master Bharadwaja, even if we saw that Master Gotama face to face, we should tell him to his face that recluse Gotama is a destroyer of growth. Why is that? Because that is recorded in our scriptures. If Master Magandiya has no objection, may I tell this to Master Gotama? Let Master Bharadwaja be at ease. Tell him just what I have said. So it seems that, even those days, people would actually be very, would speak even badly, even about the Buddha. He was not universally respected in the land in which he was born and lived and became enlightened. So meanwhile, remember the Buddha was in the grove meditating. Meanwhile, with the divine ear which is purified and surpasses the human, the Blessed One heard this conversation between the Brahmin of the Bharadwaja clan and the wanderer Magandiya. Now when it was evening, the Blessed One rose from meditation and returned to the Brahmin's fire chamber and sat down on the spread of grass made ready. Then the Brahmin of the Bharadwaja clan went to the Blessed One and exchanged greetings with him. When this courteous and amiable talk was finished, the Brahmin sat down at one side, and the Blessed One asked him, Bharadwaja, did you have any conversation with the wanderer Magandiya about this spread of grass? When this was said, the Brahmin, awestruck and with his hair standing on end, replied, We wanted to tell Master Gotama about that very thing, but Master Gotama has anticipated us. Basically, he wanted to know how the heck did the Buddha know this? But this discussion between the Blessed One and the Brahmin of the Bharadwaja clan was left unfinished. For just then, the wanderer Magandiya, while walking and wandering for exercise, came to the Brahmin's fire chamber and went up to the Blessed One. He exchanged greetings with the Blessed One, and when this courteous and amiable talk was finished, he sat down at one side. The Blessed One said to him, Magandiya, the eye delights in forms and takes delight in forms, rejoices in forms. This is just what the eye sees. That has been tamed by the Tathagata. This is how the Buddha always calls himself. Guarded, protected and restrained. And he teaches the Dhamma for its restraint. Was it with reference to this that you said the recluse Gotama is a destroyer of growth? It was with reference to this, Master Gotama, that I said the recluse Gotama is a destroyer of growth. Why is that? Because it's recorded in our scripture. The ear delights in sounds, the nose delights in odors, the tongue delights in flavors, and the body delights in what is touched. The mind delights in mind objects and takes delight in mind objects, rejoices in mind objects. That has been tamed by the Tathagata, guarded, protected and restrained, and he teaches the Dhamma for its restraint. Was it with reference to that? Was it reference to this that you said the recluse Gotama is a destroyer of growth? It was with reference to this, Master Gotama, that I said the recluse Gotama is a destroyer of growth. Why is that? Because it's recorded in our scriptures. So it's quite clear that this Magandiya, he is not really interested in restraining the six senses. And rather, he found out later on, it's like trying to enjoy the senses as much as you possibly can. And the growth of that enjoyment is the path which Magandiya is following. Basically, just someone who likes to experience things as much as possible in this world. What do you think, Magandiya? Here someone may have formerly enjoyed himself with forms cognizable by the eye that are wished for, desired, agreeable and likable, connected with sensual desire and provocative of lust. On a later occasion, having understood as they actually are the origin, the disappearance, the gratification, the danger and the escape in the case of these forms, he might abandon craving for these forms, remove the fever for these sight objects, and abide without thirst, with a mind inwardly at peace. What would you say to him, Magandiya? Nothing, Master Gotama. What do you think, Magandiya? Here someone may have formerly enjoyed himself with sounds cognizable by the ear, with odours cognizable by the nose, flavours cognizable by the tongue, tangibles cognizable by the body that are wished for, desired, agreeable, unlikable, connected with sensual desire and provocative of lust. On a later occasion, having understood as they actually are, the origin, the disappearance, the gratification, the danger, and the escape, in the case of tangibles, he might abandon craving for tangibles, remove fever for tangibles, and abide without thirst, with the mind inwardly at peace. What would you say to him, Magandiya? Nothing, Master Gautama. Now, first of all, I'll point out, well, we started off with the 6 senses. Now, in the last this paragraph, we're just refining it down to the 5 senses, leaving out the mind. That's an important point, which we'll come back to in a moment. And now the Buddha says something about his experience of these sensory pleasures. Magandiya, formerly when I lived the home life, I enjoyed myself, provided and endowed with the 5 causes of sensual pleasure, namely with forms cognizable by the eye, sounds cognizable by the ear, odours cognizable by the nose, flavours cognizable by the tongue, with tangibles cognizable by the body, all that are wished for, desired, agreeable and likable, connected with sensual desire and provocative of lust. I had 3 palaces, one for the rainy season, one for the winter, and one for the summer. I lived in the rains palace for the 4 months of the rainy season, enjoying myself with musicians who were all female, and I did not go down to the lower palace. On a later occasion, having understood as they actually are the origin, the disappearance, the gratification, the danger and the escape of these sensual pleasures, I abandoned craving for these sensual pleasures. The sensual pleasures here mean the pleasures of these very 5 senses. I removed fever for sensual pleasures, and I abide without thirst, with a mind inwardly at peace. I see other beings who are not free from lust for sensual pleasures, being devoured by craving for sensual pleasures, burning with fever for sensual pleasures, indulging in sensual pleasures, and I do not envy them, nor do I delight therein. Why is that? Because there is, Magandiya, a delight apart from sensual pleasures, apart from unwholesome states, which surpasses divine bliss. Since I take delight in that, I do not envy what is inferior, nor do I delight in that inferior. So he's giving his experience before he became a monk of all of the enjoyable time he had with the 5 senses. But now he was saying that having removed the thirst and fever for these 5 sense pleasures, he delights in something which is superior. The sensual pleasures, so that which is apart from sensual pleasures, apart from unwholesome states. And what does that mean? What is that which is apart from sensual pleasures, apart from unwholesome states? In Pali, that is vivicca kamehi, vivicca akusalehi damehi. Anybody know? Jhana, yeah, that's a description of the first jhana. And the other jhanas afterwards. Apart from sensual pleasures, I sometimes call it the 5 senses, apart from unwholesome states, he abides in the first jhana. So that gives you an idea of what the Buddha was saying over here. Compared to the delight of the jhanas, it's much better than these 5 senses. So why should he delight in the inferior when he has access to the superior? And that's one of the reasons why you all know my teachings. I try and teach you guys and girls how to get these jhanas so you understand what the Buddha is really talking about. So if you have that pleasure, why are you at all interested in these other pleasures? That's what the Buddha is saying. Suppose, any questions about that so far? Yes? Oh yeah, that's right, got to do that.
Only part of your time is spent in jhanas. the rest of the time, are you not allowed to indulge in the pleasures of the senses?
That's a very good question. If, you're only spending part of the time in jhanas, and people can only spend part of the time in jhanas as a human being. You still have to sort of exist in the world with the five senses. So what should you really do? It's here that the Buddha was actually saying that if you calm down that thirst and desire for that sensory pleasures, then the access to the jhanas becomes very easy. But if you really indulge in those sensory pleasures for the rest of the time, that's what makes the jhanas almost inaccessible. So what the person does is, yes, they have the delight in the jhanas accessible for them, but the rest of the time they just calm that fever and that sort of excitement for the five senses. And the reason they do that, again, I haven't got into this yet, is they understand these five things: the origin of these sensory pleasures, their disappearance, their gratification, danger, and escape. It's not mentioned here, but what the origin of these things, how they come together. For each of these senses, you say, it's just a beautiful object comes in front of the eye. And because that beautiful object comes into the eye, that's why it's attractive. If an ugly object comes in front of the eye, then it's unattractive. And the point is, you've got no control over this. And so the disappearance is that these things come and go. They're impermanent. You can't always have beauty in front of you. It comes and it goes. That's the disappearance. The gratification. Yeah, these sensory pleasures, they have a joy to them. But the danger is, the joy doesn't last that long. And the joy which you get from sensory pleasures, it just keeps you wanting for more. It never gives you a peace. That's why the Buddha says like a fever or a thirst. The idea of a thirst is the same word, this word for craving in Buddhism, danha, it's the same as the word for being thirsty. When you really need a glass of water and you're really, really hot, you really need something to drink. And that's sort of that craving, that must-have part of these five sense pleasures. That is the danger. And the escape from them, that is just removing the desire for these five senses. But the only way you can actually do that is not philosophically, not through negativity. Remember, like in medieval Christian asceticism, the monasticism, some of these people would really get into ascetic practices, like mortifying their body, whipping themselves, fasting. It's these guys who used to live on the top of these old pillars, the stylites, out in all types of weather at all time, never washing, eating really, really gross food, thinking that the more ascetic they were, the more they would actually overcome this attachment to these senses and become closer to God. But those sorts of things doesn't work. That is not the escape in the case of sensory pleasures. The escape is very much this eightfold path which actually leads into these jhanas as the eighth factor. So you really see something much better. So the answer to the question is, you cannot stay forever in the jhanas, not in this human life. But you realize that the joy you have in the jhanas is very much dependent upon the restraint you have outside. So you live a life of restraint and peace amongst the five senses, without the fever. Does that make any sense? Yes.
Ajahn, is the escape always the Eightfold Path?
Yes.
And so that's a general answer to any experience, sensory experience, the escape from any of the sensory world. It seems to me to be a cover-all answer, and
it is
maybe lacks specificity.
It's a cover-all answer, but it is a brilliant answer. Remember that eightfold path, especially in sensuality. What the Buddha is saying here is very powerful, that you do need something better, an experience which is better. Just an idea that these things are not good enough, an idea that I'm a Buddhist, I should not be enjoying my sensory pleasures, an idea that I will will myself not to enjoy sensory pleasures is just psychological denial. It will not work.
So when you say the Eightfold Path, do you mean that this particular sensory experience, like for example, in some of the teachings the Buddha says, well, with one particular disturbance, one should try and understand it. For another particular observance, one should try and avoid it. For one particular another observance or difficulty, one should try and overcome it. Are you talking about the Eightfold Path as a general, just get on the track and go, or are you talking about the Eightfold Path as there are things within various aspects of the Eightfold Path which need to be applied in specific situations to this particular sensory addiction?
No, the escapes which you are talking about is a little bit of restraint. In other words, you see something which is delightful, you stop yourself, you change your object, or you avoid these things. But that is only a temporary, subduing of those that sense. It's not a real escape from it. It just hides it under the carpet. A very good example of that is, again, from Ajahn Chah's biography. He would often tell us that when he was a young novice, maybe 18 or 19 years of age, with all the hormones going through his body, whenever he'd see a pretty Thai girl, he would have lust. It's just normal, natural for a boy. So he decided for the 3 months of the rainy season retreat, he would never look at a human being. He'd put his eyes down. When he went out on alms round, he would never look at a woman at all. Not a man either, and except the other monks in the monastery. And he had such strong control that he managed to complete that 3 months. But then after the 3 months, when his vow was over, the first woman he looked at, he got so much heat in his body. He got so much lust. And he realized that type of avoidance was so superficial. It never really got to the root of the problem. You just put it under a rock. Actually, it was worse than putting it under a rock. If you put a rock over a plant, a lot of times it will kill the plant. This just made the power more strong.
So are you saying then that the escape is always developing something greater in its levels?
Exactly. You develop something greater, more delightful. You see, the real way through it is these 5 things. Seeing the origin, the causal origin of these pleasures. When you see their causal origin, it's not under your power. It has a cause outside of your will, outside of your intelligence, outside of your power and your wisdom. These things come and they go, no matter who you are. Later on, the Buddha gives the simile of a king or a king's minister who is supposed to be so powerful, so wealthy, they should be able to get whatever they want. But even they can't do that. How can we? So the origin and their disappearance go according to causes which are outside our control. That's one of the reasons why this is not going to be happy. And you see also, they do have a gratification. We're not denying that these things don't give people pleasure. But we're saying they have a danger to them as well. So, one of the similes the Buddha gave is like borrowing money. If you borrow money from the bank, it's great. Have enough money, you can go on a holiday overseas, you can get your house, you can buy a nice car, big red sports car. That's a gratification. But the danger is you've got to pay it back. And the thing is, when you pay these loans back, you have to pay them back with interest. More than actually you gave for the car, you have to pay it back with more. So he said that a lot of times you're borrowing happiness. You have to pay it back with interest. And that's the suffering afterwards. When you get the bills, that's the suffering. I want to just finish off with, and lastly, the escape. The escape, is the Eightfold Path. Please come over here. And one of the reasons it's the Eightfold Path, and I'm saying this because it does culminate in the jhanas. It's a path which supports and culminates in these jhanas, which give you another way of experiencing life and what real pleasure is. And this is why those are the pleasures of the mind. And these other ones are the pleasures of the 5 senses. Yes?
So is the Buddha's sort of warning that in the worldly pleasure, however big or however successful, however mega pleasure it is bound to end with despair?
Yes.
There's just no escape from that?
there is an
in terms of
escape
the
from that.
worldly.
Well, there's no worldly escape. It has to be eightfold.
No matter
path.
how
Better.
intelligent or how well
Exactly, yeah.
you scheme this scheme,
That's right, yes.
always end in despair
Of course it does.
or disappointment.
Disappointment. It's never quite enough. The movie you go and see, the food you taste, the sex you have, is almost there, but never quite enough.
Or the power, or
You
the
always need some
success,
more
or the
next week.
esteem, or the recognition,
Of
all
course it's
end
there.
in despair.
Of course it does, yes. I'm getting to know a bit about fame and recognition now, and it's very despairing. You never get any rest.
Can I say something, Ajahn Brahm?
Quickly, you only
Just
got,
quickly, just yeah.
you only got 3
Since you
questions.
mentioned about God just now, God, yeah, God, yeah.
I think that's not really part of the sutta here. So you've got to keep it on track.
Next time, I'll ask
Okay,
next time.
next time, yeah. Keep it on sense pleasures. Okay. Now you get some. I'm glad you're actually catching into what's being said here. It's a powerful sutta. We're going now to paragraph 11. He just said, since I take delight in that, the pleasure apart from the 5 senses, and he's referring quite clearly here to the jhanas, because that's, apart from sensual pleasures, apart from unwholesome states, that is the first lines of description of the jhanas. Since I take delight in that, I do not envy what is inferior, nor do I delight therein in the inferior. Now the first simile, suppose Magandiya, a householder or a householder's son, was rich, with great wealth and property, and being provided and endowed with the 5 causes of sensory pleasure. He might enjoy himself or herself with forms cognizable by the eye, sounds cognizable by the ear, odours cognizable by the nose, flavours cognizable by the tongue, and tangibles cognizable by the body, that are wished for, desired, agreeable and likeable, connected with sensual desire and provocative of lust. Having conducted himself well in body, speech and mind, on the dissolution of the body after death, he might reappear in a happy destination, in the heavenly world, in the retinue of the gods of the 33. And there, surrounded by a group of nymphs in the Nandana grove, he would enjoy himself, provided and endowed with the 5 causes of divine sensual pleasure. Suppose this Nandana grove, it means like delightful grove. The 33 is just one of the heaven realms posited in the time of the Buddha. In other words, this would be, a realm which everybody would have as part of the culture of India at that time. They would understand this is a heavenly realm, everything is far more superior. Suppose he saw a householder, this is as a deva, as a god, suppose he saw a householder or a householder's son enjoying himself, provided and endowed with the 5 causes of human sensory pleasure. What do you think, Magandiya? Would that young god, surrounded by the group of nymphs in the Nandana grove, a nymph is supposed to be a beautiful young girl, if you don't know that word, it's supposed to be, I think, a Greek word. He might call a bimbo. What else you can do? Okay, I think that word got a laugh, so that must be it. Would that young god, surrounded by the group of bimbos in the Nandana grove, enjoying himself, provided and endowed with the 5 causes of divine sensory pleasure, would he envy the householder or the householder's son for the 5 causes of human sensory pleasure, or would he return to human sensory pleasure? No, Master Gautama, why not? Because heavenly sensual pleasures are more excellent and sublime than human sensory pleasures. So too, Magandiya. Formerly, when I lived a home life, I enjoyed myself, provided and endowed with the 5 causes of sensory pleasure, with forms cognizable by the eye, tangibles cognizable by the body, all these things which are wished for, desired, agreeable and likeable, connected with sensual desire and provocative of lust. On a later occasion, having understood as they actually are the gratification, the danger and the escape, they've actually missed out the origin and the faded disappearance. Having understood as they actually are the gratification, danger and escape in the case of sensory pleasures, I abandoned craving for sensory pleasures. I removed fever for sensory pleasures, and I abide without thirst, with a mind inwardly at peace. I see other beings who are not free from lust for sensory pleasures, being devoured by craving for sensory pleasures, burning with fever for sensory pleasures, indulging in sensory pleasures, and I do not envy them, nor do I delight therein. Why is that? Because there is, Magandiya, a delight apart from sensory pleasures, apart from unwholesome states, which surpasses divine bliss. Since I take delight in that, I don't envy what is inferior, nor do I delight therein. So that's one of the first examples of seeing something which is inferior. Now he's saying just heavenly pleasures towards human pleasures. Now why would a heavenly being want human pleasures? One would always go to that pleasure which is superior. Now the next similes come, which are very common in the time of the Buddha. They may not be so understandable today because this was people who were afflicted with leprosy. And it seems from the reading the Buddha's scriptures, in many places they use this simile, that people with this disease of leprosy, with sores and blisters on their body, because scratching and because these things getting infected, devoured by worms, it seems that what they would often do would actually try and cauterize their body over burning charcoal and thereby get some sort of relief from this terrible itch. Well, this was obviously very common in the time of the Buddha, and because of this, that he used this as a simile. This is paragraph 13. Suppose Magandiya, there was a leper with sores and blisters on his limbs, being devoured by worms, scratching the scabs off the openings of his wounds with his nails, cauterizing his body over a burning charcoal pit. Then his friends and companions, his kinsmen and relatives, would bring a physician to treat him. The physician would make medicine for him, and by means of that medicine, the man would be cured of his leprosy and would become well and happy, independent, master of himself, able to go where he likes. Then he might see another leper with sores and blisters on his limbs, being devoured by worms, scratching the scabs of the openings of his wounds with his nails, cauterizing his body over a charcoal pit. What do you think, Magandiya? Would that man envy that leper for his burning charcoal pit or his use of medicine? No, Master Gotama. Why is that? Because when there is sickness, medicine has to be made, and when there's no sickness, medicine does not have to be made. So too, Magandiya, formerly when I lived a home life and enjoying these sensory pleasures, and now I don't. Since I take delight in something more superior, I don't envy what is inferior, nor do I delight in the inferior. So this is a simile which may not come across as well as it should, but if you've ever had sort of a skin disease and the itch, sometimes scratching it feels so much pleasure for a few seconds. I remember when I first came here to Perth, I must have carried this in from Thailand, but I had ringworm on my testicles. And I remember they got me some medicine, but when you scratched it, it was just so voluptuous. You get so much pleasure out of scratching this terrible itch, but afterwards it hurt like hell. And I don't know if you ever had something like ringworm before, or some of these skin diseases. Sometimes you just really want to scratch. And yeah, it's great scratching it. You really feel this great pleasure, but then afterwards it's terrible. And that's similar here to some of these sores of leprosy. Burning on the charcoal pit would give a sense of pleasure, and scratching them would give pleasure. But it's not a very nice pleasure. And the Buddha is actually saying this is the itch of the five senses, the itch of wanting some excitement to see, to hear, to listen to. Another one, again a leper simile. Suppose, Magandiya, there was a leper with sores and blisters on his limbs, being devoured by worms, scratching the scabs off the opening of his wounds with his nails, cauterizing his body over a burning charcoal pit. Then his friends and companions, his kinsman and relative, would bring a physician to treat him. The physician would make medicine for him, and by means of that medicine, the man would be cured of his leprosy and would become well and happy, independent, master of himself, and able to go where he likes. Then two strong men would seize him by both arms and drag him towards a burning charcoal pit. What do you think, Magandiya? Would that man twist his body this way and that? Yes, Master Gotama. Why is that? Because that fire is indeed painful to touch. It's hot and scorching. What do you think, Magandiya? Is it only now that fire is painful to touch, hot and scorching? Or previously too was that fire painful to touch, hot and scorching? Master Gautama, that fire is now painful to touch, hot and scorching, and previously too, that fire was painful to touch, hot and scorching. For when the man was a leper with sores and blisters on his limbs, being devoured by worms, scratching the scabs off the opening of his wounds with his nails, his faculties were impaired thus. His faculties were impaired. Thus, though the fire was actually painful to touch, he mistakenly perceived it as pleasant. So, this is saying what the leper was feeling. He mistakenly perceived it as pleasant, even though it was painful. So too, Magandiya, in the past, sensory pleasures were painful to touch, hot and scorching. In the future, sensory pleasures will be painful to touch, hot and scorching. And now, at present, sensory pleasures are painful to touch, hot and scorching. But these beings who are not free from lust for sensory pleasures, who are devoured by craving for sensory pleasures, who burn with fever for sensory pleasures, have faculties that are impaired. Thus, though sensory pleasures are actually painful to touch, they acquire a mistaken perception of them as pleasant. I remember when I saw that teaching first, that's wow. All the things I thought of as pleasant, are they really pleasant? Or is it mistaken perception? And it brought me to a famous story in my own life, my first glass of beer. As a 14-year-old, I snuck into this pub in Richmond, to the southwest of London, and got myself my first half pint of beer. It's like a rite of passage for a young man growing up, sneaking in underage to get a beer because everyone else was drinking beer and it was supposed to be a cool thing to do. And when I drank that first half pint of beer, I couldn't believe how bad it tasted. I had a really free and open mind, and I don't know why anyone would drink this stuff. And because of peer pressure, because everybody else, almost without exception, would say how delicious beer was. And they spend so many evenings spending so much money buying and drinking this stuff and saying what a wonderful night they had. And no party would be complete without beer. The peer pressure was so strong that within 6 months I started to enjoy it. That's how you acquire a mistaken perception of them as pleasant. Later on in my monk life in Thailand, again, we didn't really have much medicine at all to keep us healthy. We're very, very poor. And somebody got this book, I remember it was by a fellow called Armstrong, called The Water of Life. And he was saying that urine was a great medicine and cures many, many things. And so, being a young man willing to try anything, with a few other guys in the monastery, we started drinking our own urine. Is that tough, do you think? You think, yuck. But it's amazing. Just after a few weeks, it was actually quite tasty. Nice and salty. Who's got the right perception or not? And actually, I carried on doing that for 3 or 4 years. It's only when I came here to Thailand. Because I remember just, the hot season here in Thailand, the sun was so hot that, that really was a bit too concentrated to drink. It didn't have enough water. So that's when I gave it up and I never took it up again. But there we go. You do things like that. Is it pleasurable? Is it unpleasurable? After a while, it actually tastes pleasurable. If you don't believe me, try it. Didn't do them any harm anyway. So, sometimes mistaken perception of them as pleasant and unpleasant. What is the correct perception? It really starts you to question all these things we think as pleasurable. Are they really pleasurable? Or is it really just conditioned? Everyone else says this is pleasurable. Yes.
Brahm, I did a little bit of research on metabolic learning, where a taste that is normally quite terrible but actually improves and makes you will become liked. So it becomes very positive. So it's possible, that the urine was actually helping you in that sense.
But that doesn't explain beer, because that doesn't make you...
Well, no. And that came to my other question, if I'm allowed 2 questions. I wanted to ask about beer being a drug, whether drugs are a sense, are they changing the mind? Is this come under the six senses, or how does that fit in to the desire for drugs?
Again, desire for drugs like any other pleasure, because a lot of times many of the drugs give enhanced sensory pleasures. It makes the music just more exciting. It makes like sights really weird and incredibly beautiful. So I think some of those are just enhancing the five senses, strengthening them. But I think it's also, because I never really got into drugs as a kid, so I really don't know too much what I'm talking about. But I think from hearing other people that sometimes when you have the downers, it enhances the senses, not just the pleasure, but the pain. So when you really go down, it really hurts. Is that true?
I'm not sure. I don't think beer enhances the senses as far as I know. But
yeah, indeed. But people have a lot of pleasure, when they're drunk, they go to the parties. I'm not sure, but it's certainly one of those drugs which, or one of those things which, first of all, when you take them, wonder what's the big deal about this? Why is it supposed to be delicious? And that sort of started me asking questions about some of the other pleasures of life. I did remember reading an article, again, these are articles on science magazines, and I should have really kept it. If anyone has this research, then give me a copy of it, please do. I could have it wrong, but I think I remember correctly that somebody was doing research on sexual intercourse and found actually the receptors in the brain which were glowing, which showed a sign that these were excited, were the usual receptors for pain. And so actually the receptors in the brain for sexual intercourse were actually showing this should be painful. But it was actually considered to be pleasurable. Do you know anything about
cocaine,
that?
Ajahn.
Sorry?
It's cocaine. Dopamine, and my understanding is, and I stand to be corrected, that the release with orgasm releases dopamine, and it's similar to some of the psychotropic drugs that are released. There's different ones. Serotonin is one, which is kind of like more about bonding, but the buzz thing, that's dopamine. And
but the one which somebody was saying, it was pain receptors, the same thing which happens when you're hurting, the same part of the brain.
It is. You think about it, people that are into S&M, Ajahn, people that are in for a good spanking, and they enjoy that. There's a mild form of pain, and that generates a dopamine release. So, you're right.
Yeah. So sometimes, what's going on here? Is this painful? Is it pleasurable? That's really asked some tough questions. Things which you think are pleasurable. Is it really pleasurable? Or is it just like the leper, cauterizing their limbs over fire? Or me scratching the ringworm? Anyway, we carry on with these tough questions which should be asked. Now, what did we get to? Paragraph 17, thank you. Suppose Magandiya, again the leper, Similes. There was a leper with sores and blisters on his limbs, being devoured by worms, scratching the scabs off the opening of his wounds with his nails, cauterizing his body over a burning charcoal pit. The more he scratches the scabs and cauterizes his body, the fouler, more evil-smelling and more infected the openings of his wounds would become. Yet he would find a certain measure of satisfaction and enjoyment in scratching the openings of his wounds. So too, Magandiya, beings who are not free from lust for sensory pleasures, who are devoured by craving for sensory pleasures, who burn with fever for sensory pleasures, still indulge in sensory pleasures. The more such beings indulge in sensory pleasures, the more their craving for sensory pleasures increases, and the more they are burned by the fever for sensory pleasures. Yet they find a certain measure of satisfaction and enjoyment in dependence on the five causes of sensory pleasure. And here the Buddha says a very important thing. The more you indulge in the sensory pleasures, the more the craving increases. And it's one of those things we think, oh no, if I just satisfy my sensory pleasures, then I won't want any more afterwards. I'll just try and just have as much enjoyment as I possibly can, and then I'd realise for myself I don't need any more. But the opposite actually works. The more you indulge in these sensory pleasures, the more you can have these sensory pleasures, the more you want, the more the craving increases. So it doesn't satisfy the thirst. It just makes you more thirsty. Now there's another simile here. What do you think, Magandiya? Have you ever seen or heard of a king or a king's minister enjoying himself or herself, provided and endowed with the 5 causes of sensory pleasure, who, without abandoning craving for sensory pleasures, without removing fever for sensory pleasures, was able to abide free from thirst, with a mind inwardly at peace, or is able or will be able to so abide? No, Master Gautama. He's pointing out now just the average person's understanding of peace of mind, be able to abide inwardly at peace. And I think many people would understand that sometimes people who are searching for sensory pleasures can never find that peace. Always wanting to go to the next hit, going to the refrigerator, there's nothing to eat in it. Surfing on the internet or on the channels on the TV. I don't know, how many channels are there on when you get these, was it the satellite TV? 60, 70, 80? And sometimes people say nothing on TV tonight. 70 or 80 channels. Now I remember when I was a kid in London, we had ITV and BBC, and sometimes there were fights to the death, almost, not quite, on which programme we would have on. ITV only had 2 channels. But sometimes, since the more we have, the more unsatisfied we are. Interesting. Anyway, good Magandiya, I too have never seen or heard of a king or a king's minister. These were the most wealthy people, powerful people. King or a king's minister enjoying themselves, provided and endowed with the 5 causes of sensory pleasures, who without abandoning that craving for sensory pleasures, without removing the fever of sensory pleasures, was able to abide free from thirst with a mind inwardly at peace, or is able or will be able to so abide. On the contrary, Magandiya, those recluses or Brahmins, these are the monks, the nuns who would wander the forests and roads of India at that time, those recluses or Brahmins who abide or will abide free from thirst, with a mind inwardly at peace, all do so after having understood as they actually are the origin, the disappearance, the gratification, the danger, and the escape in the case of sensory pleasures. And it is after abandoning that craving for sensory pleasures and removing fever for sensory pleasures that they abide or will abide free from thirst with a mind inwardly at peace. Then at that point the Blessed One uttered this exclamation: the greatest of all gains is health. That's the greatest wealth, is good health. And Nibbana is the greatest bliss, the greatest happiness. That's a very famous saying, Nibbanang paramang sukhang. The word paramount, we have that in English, paramount. The words are connected. You might say Nibbana is the paramount happiness. The Eightfold Path is the best of all paths, for it leads safely to the deathless. The deathless is a simile for Nibbana. When this was said, the wanderer Magandiya said to the Blessed One, "It is wonderful, Master Gautama, it is marvellous how well that has been expressed by Master Gautama. The greatest of all gains is health. Nibbana is the greatest bliss. We too have heard this said by earlier wanderers in the tradition of the teachers, and it agrees, Master Gautama. But Magandiya, when you heard that said by earlier wanderers in the tradition of the teachers, what is that health? What is that Nibbana?" When this was said, the wanderer Magandiya rubs his limb with his hand and said, "Oh, this is that health, Master Gautama. This is that Nibbana, for I am now healthy and happy and nothing afflicts me." And that gives an idea of what he thought that Nibbana was, the highest happiness. Just physical well-being and just having whatever you want. Magandiya, suppose there was a man born blind who could not see dark and light forms, who could not see blue, yellow, red or pink forms, who could not see what was even and uneven, who could not see the stars or the sun or the moon, that he might hear a man with good eyesight saying, "Good indeed, sir, is a white cloth, beautiful, spotless and clean." And he would go in search of a white cloth. Then a man would cheat him with a dirty, soiled garment thus, "Good man, here's a white cloth for you, beautiful, spotless and clean." And he would accept it and put it on, and being satisfied with it, he would utter words of satisfaction thus, "Good indeed, sir, is a white cloth, beautiful, spotless and clean." What do you think, Magandiya? When that man born blind accepted that dirty, soiled garment, put it on, and being satisfied with it, uttered words of satisfaction thus, "Good indeed, sirs, is a white cloth, beautiful, spotless and clean," did he do so knowing and seeing, or out of faith in that man with good eyesight? Venerable sir, he would have done so unknowing and unseeing, and out of faith in the man with good eyesight. So sometimes if you're blind and put faith in things, you get sold a dirty old cloth. So much for blind faith. That's a very good simile. I say that a lot. So too, Magandiya, the wanderers of other sects are blind and visionless. They do not know health. They do not see Nibbana. Yet they utter the stanza thus: "The greatest of all gains is health. Nibbana is the greatest bliss." This stanza was uttered by the earlier accomplished ones, fully enlightened ones, thus: "The greatest of all gains is health. Nibbana is the greatest bliss. The Eightfold Path is the best of paths, for it leads safely to the deathless." But now it has gradually become current among ordinary people. There's an interesting aside there, because it seems that, there were Buddhas before Gautama the Buddha, and it seems that some of their teachings, even though that they had declined and no one really understood them, they were still around. And now this is one of those. It seems that people still had some memory of teachings of many, maybe centuries before, things such as Nibbana is the greatest bliss, but they never really understood what it meant. And for those of you interested in one of the other anomalies in Buddhism, the Buddha's first two teachers, Alara Kalama and Udakaramaputa, was supposed to be teaching these great states based on jhana, but which didn't seem to be based on jhana at all. It seems to be that this was just like an echo from previous teachings, that yes, before there were these things, but they had been literally dumbed down, as this particular phrase was also dumbed down. Obviously, what Buddhism meant by the greatest of all gains is health, people can understand that, but Nibbana is the greatest bliss. The meaning of Nibbana had been dumbed down. And I see that happening even now. You all know that I really teach jhanas and I encourage jhanas, but often even jhanas are dumbed down in many traditions. There's obviously to see the reason why. People know now in the Buddhist circles, especially in the West, that jhana is important, but it's sometimes difficult to attain. So, because of the desire, the market pressure, if you like, on teachers, that their disciples get jhana, it's so easy for them to dumb it down. So really what is not real jhana, teachers will say, well, that's a jhana. It's actually the requirements are being dumbed down. I see the same thing with degrees at university. I remember as a student reading Goethe's Dr. Faustus. If any of you know that story, the beginning of that story was this fellow Faustus in Germany, I forget which city, he was awarded a doctorate. And they'd only award a doctorate maybe once every 5 or 6 years. So if you got a doctorate, a PhD, I mean, you're really, really brilliant. But you all now know that doctorates, hundreds of doctorates are issued every year, in all universities. You can see in those centuries, the doctorate has been dumbed down. And even bachelor's degrees, what was required in the early years, maybe 20 years ago, was much tougher than is required today. There's always a dumbing down of standards. There will always be that. That's just the nature of our world. And there's also will be with jhanas. And also you can see it happening here. What Nibbana meant, the word dumbing down. Now it has gradually become current among ordinary people. And although this body, Magandiya, this is again top of page 615, and although this body, Magandiya, is a disease, a tumour, a dart, a calamity, an affliction, and you know that when you get old, referring to this body, you say, this is that health. Master Gautama, this is that Nibbana. You don't have that noble vision, Magandiya, by means of which you might know health and see Nibbana. And by this time, at least, Magandiya had sort of got the message. So he said, I have confidence in Master Gautama thus. Master Gautama is capable of teaching me the Dhamma in such a way that I can come to know health and see Nibbana. He's becoming convinced now. But Magandiya, suppose were a man born blind who could not see dark and light forms or the sun and moon, and his friends and companions, his kinsmen and relatives would bring a physician to treat him. The physician would make a medicine for him, yet by means of that medicine the man's vision would not arise or be purified. In other words, it wouldn't work. What do you think, Magandiya? Would that doctor reap weariness and disappointment? Yes, Master Gautama, so too Magandiya. If I were to teach in the Dhamma thus, this is that health, this is that Nibbana, you might not know that health or see Nibbana, and that would be wearisome and troublesome for me. So he's saying that, sometimes the treatment doesn't work. Sometimes he doesn't see the health, doesn't understand Nibbana. Even the time of the Buddha, not every disciple got enlightened. Some left and they gave up and criticized the Buddha. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't have the wherewithal for it to work. But Magandiya says, look, I have confidence in Master Gautama thus. Master Gautama is capable of teaching me the Dhamma in such a way that I can come to know health and see Nibbana. Magandiya, suppose there was a man born blind who could not see dark and light forms or the sun and moon. He might hear a man with good eyesight saying, good indeed, sirs, is a white cloth, beautiful, spotless and clean. And he would go in search of a white cloth. Then a man would cheat him with a dirty, soiled garment thus. Good man, here is a white cloth for you, beautiful, spotless and clean. He would accept it and put it on. Then his friends and companions, his kinsmen and relations would bring a physician to treat him. The physician would make medicine, emetics, purgatives, ointments and counter-ointments and nasal treatment. And by means of that medicine, the man's vision would arise and be purified. Together with the arising of his vision, his desire and liking for that dirty, soiled garment would be abandoned. Then he might burn with indignation and enmity towards that man, and might think that he ought to be killed thus. Indeed, I have long been tricked, cheated, and defrauded by this man with this dirty, soiled garment, when he told me, good man, here's a white cloth for you, beautiful, spotless and clean. So too, Magandiya, if I were to teach you the Dhamma thus, this is that health, this is that Nibbana, you might not know health and see Nibbana. Together with the arising of your vision, your desire and lust for the five aggregates affected by clinging might be abandoned. Then perhaps you might think, indeed, I have long been tricked, cheated and defrauded by this mind, this citta. For when clinging, I've been clinging just to material form. I've been clinging just to feeling. I've been clinging just to perception. I've been clinging just to formations, including your will. I've been clinging just to consciousnesses. I make that a plural now. It's a much more accurate translation, to consciousnesses. With my clinging as condition, being comes to be. With being as condition, birth. With birth, condition, aging and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief and despair come to be. Such is the origin of this whole mass of suffering. That's the dependent origination there. So he's saying that, if I do get cured and I actually see, I'll be pretty pissed off that I've been tricked for such a long time. And what's fascinating here, the thing which is tricking you is your citta, your mind. Powerful thing to say. This mind of yours, sometimes you trust too much. It's very tricky, is this mind. That's one of the reasons why people have so many delusions. I mentioned this in the retreat. How can you trust your thoughts and perceptions? How many of your thoughts, which you trusted in the past, you were sure you were right, you turned out to be wrong? How many of your perceptions are real? Does beer taste delicious, or is it wrong perception? It can be very confusing. What the heck should I believe? What should I trust? And there is an answer. Again, it's other places in the suttas, in the teachings of the Buddha. The only perceptions and thoughts you can trust are those which occur when these 5 hindrances have been removed. The hindrance of desire, ill will, restlessness, sloth and torpor, or doubt. If you have any desire in your mind, you won't perceive or see or think what's really there. You'll only perceive and think what you want to think, all bent by desire. That's why, to me, beer tasted delicious, because I wanted it to taste delicious. That's why I remember my friend, there was this crazy idea in the late 60s that for those of you who couldn't afford LSD, you put a banana skin, banana peel, in a piece of, some of you are laughing, you must have done that as well, put that in a piece of aluminium foil, and when it went off, it had this hallucinogenic effect. And the electronic banana, that's what in Donovan's song, Mellow Yellow, I think. And anyway, so one of my friends tried that. And we all asked him, did it work? Did it work? I said, oh, it's amazing. Wow, it's just really high. Wow. We found out afterwards it was just a total myth. It doesn't make, there's no truth to that rumour at all. It was just one of these myths which was current amongst the hippies of London at that time. And the United States, I think that's where it came from. But the point was that because he expected it to have some hallucinogenic effect, it did. Wanting creates your perceptions and the thoughts. So if there's wanting there, the first hindrance, forget it, you can't trust your thoughts or perceptions. Ill will. Again, the ill will, you can perceive anybody as really awful, negative. You can criticize even the Buddha, as this guy did here, out of ill will. Your perceptions and thoughts get bent. Restlessness, you're not there long enough to really understand what's right in front of your eyes. That's a simile which I've given many times of walking up the hill to the monastery in Serpentine. Too fast, you just can't see anything. Slow down, stop, you can see much more. And again, sloth and torpor, you don't have to explain that. You're just too dull to see. And doubt, never again staying long. It's a form of restlessness, never staying long enough to really understand. So it's only those when the 5 hindrances are overcome that you can trust your perceptions and thoughts. Otherwise, they're bent. So you can see here that the fellow has been blaming his citta, especially the mind, when it's been affected by the hindrances. Long have you been tricked. But I have confidence in paragraph 25. I have confidence in the Master Gotama. Thus, Master Gotama is capable of teaching me the Dhamma in such a way that I might rise up from this seat, cured of my blindness. Then, Magandiya, associate with true men. Now, true men doesn't mean males. What does it actually mean by true men? This is one of those words, it's a synonym for those who have already seen the Dhamma. These are the Aryans, the stream winners, once-returners, non-returners, and arahats. So really, the translation really should be, associate with enlightened beings. When you associate with enlightened beings, you will hear enlightened Dhamma. When you hear the enlightened Dhamma, you will practice in accordance with the enlightened Dhamma. When you practice in accordance with the enlightened Dhamma, you will know and see for yourself thus. These are diseases, tumours and darts. But here, these diseases, tumours and darts cease without remainder. With the cessation of my clinging comes a cessation of being, cessation of being, cessation of birth, aging and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief and despair cease. Such is the cessation of this whole mass of suffering. When it was said, the wanderer Magandiya said, Magnificent Master Gotama, Magnificent Master Gotama, Master Gotama has made the Dhamma clear in many ways, as though he were turning upright what had been overthrown, revealing what was hidden, showing the way to one who was lost, or holding up a lamp in the dark for those with eyesight to see. I go to Master Gotama for refuge, and to the Dhamma and to the Sangha of bhikkhus. I would receive the going forth under Master Gotama, I would receive the full admission. That's the full ordination. Now the novice ordination and the full ordination, which you've seen here. Magandiya, one who formerly belonged to another sect and desires the going forth and the full admission in this Dhamma and discipline, lives on probation for 4 months. At the end of 4 months, if the monks are satisfied with them, then they give them the going forth and the full admission to the monks' state. But I recognize individual differences in this matter. So that's why, if there was somebody from another religion, another path, another philosophy, came into Buddhism, they'd just say, well, just check you out for 4 months, first of all, just to make sure that you are really able to fulfill the lifestyle of a monk, and also to make sure that the other monks agree that you belong to this little group. Make sure you fit in, basically. And Venerable Sir, if those who formerly belong to another sect and desire the going forth in the full admission in this Dharma discipline live on probation for 4 months, and if at the end of the 4 months the monks, being satisfied with them, give them the going forth in the full admission to the monk state, then I will live on probation for 4 years. At the end of the 4 years, if the monks are satisfied with me, then let them give me the going forth and the full admission to the monk state. And so with an attitude like that, when the Buddha says, I recognize individual differences, he got ordained pretty quickly. So then the wanderer Magandiya received the going forth under the Blessed One, received the full admission, and soon, not longer after his full admission, dwelling alone, withdrawn, diligent, ardent and resolute, the Venerable Magandiya, by realizing for himself with direct knowledge, here and now entered upon and abided in that supreme goal of the holy life, for the sake of which clansmen rightly go forth from the home in life into homelessness. He directly knew birth is destroyed, the holy life has been lived, what had to be done has been done, there is no more coming to any state of being. And the Venerable Magandiya became another one of the Arahats from that little teaching. So there was a guy who was very attached to his sensory pleasures, and because the Buddha's taught him, well, let go of those sensory pleasures, something much more enjoyable. He followed that path and saw that he could let go of his clinging and eventually became an Arahat. So that's the Magandiya Sutta. Any other questions anyone has about that? And about the perversions of perceptions, how sometimes, whether it's a leper or the blind man, can be sold a white cloth when it's really a dirty cloth. It's very challenging, that, because it really takes you away from your comfort zone, all the things which you've been taught and encouraged in our world, that this is happiness. The advertisements you see on TV. Happiness is a new car, because when you get a new car, there's always a beautiful girl sitting in it somewhere. It's not the car you want as a young man, it's the girl sitting next to you in the passenger seat. At least that's what I did when I saw all these advertisements. It's just the law of the pleasures. Or you see, I still remember just seeing these amazing pictures of New Zealand and the mountains and the lakes there. And I always wanted to go there. It looked so beautiful, but what you didn't see in the photographs were the sandflies. As soon as I went there, I couldn't stand still. Sandflies all over you. So there's a lot of the things in the sensory pleasures which we don't see. But when you actually see them properly, it challenges you. It threatens some of the very reasons for your existence and what motivates your life. That's why it's tough as a monk teaching this. Because sometimes people, you guys are weird. Get a life. Go out and enjoy yourself. Yes.
I've got a question about how we add on to the senses. It's to do with sex, and it's to do with how you might meet someone and make mad passionate love with them, and that's all fine, but then that moves forward and things develop over about a 12 or 18 months period where the dopamine hit from that initial biological thing dies away and you're left with the raw warts and all person. You then decide you want to be with this person and you build a sense of loving relationship and learn how to develop and trust that person, and intimacy deepens over a number of years. Essentially, this is something that you add on to the initial experience. My question is that added on experience of trusting and deep intimacy that you begin to share with another person, is that something that is essentially a delusion, that is the sense of being able to trust someone else and to keep the faith in your relationship with that person? Would the Buddha consider that those add-ons a delusion, or would the Buddha consider that mental emotional process something that has value in inclining one towards Nibbana?
Okay, there is a certain element of those experiences which is a letting go of your desires, a letting go of your selfishness when you have to take into account the wishes of a partner. And there is that trust, is a little bit of letting go, which you have to do. To have those really great sexual experiences, you really have to take away your sense of self and control and just really go with it. I'm saying that as a monk, 40 years, I think, since I last had sex. But you can understand what goes on, by the nature of the mind. But there is a certain path, so far you can go, but you can't go any further, because it also leads to a lot of clinging. And that is the danger of those relationships. And that clinging is part of control. That's my partner. This is my relationship. And the ability just to let it go is very, very difficult. You know what happens in relationships. Sometimes they reach their use-by date. But people have got different sort of ideas of what the use-by date is. It's very rare the couple agree on the same use-by date and can part.
One of the things that happens in a good relationship where there's deepening experiences of intimacy over a long period of time is that usually when one partner dies, although there is sadness, there's usually a real capacity for the other partner to say, well, I really enjoyed what we had and I'm grateful for what we had, and that's the end of it, and I'm happy for what we had rather than I'm miserable for what I don't have now. Is that an indicator that you've basically been plodding along the correct line?
It means that's an indication that your relationship has actually grown beyond the average. Because the average is a lot of clinging, a lot of fear when you lose the other person. You define yourself as part of that person. So you're losing part of yourself, literally. It's very hard to know who you are after that person dies. So it is a difficult thing. But for those, sometimes you do meet, quite often actually, because these are the people who come to the Buddhist Society, who take their relationship to that level, where it's not so much of a clinging anymore, but a letting go, where they really do become kalyana mittas, rather than lovers. And those people then they're making a huge step forward. But I go back to what the Buddha says, that, in relationships, sensory pleasures, there is the gratification and the danger, and eventually escape from it. There is a dangerous as well. You can't have the love without the arguments. Don't think that the arguments is a case that you're failing. That's part of having that relationship. It's part of the learning, the growing. And sometimes we grow together, sometimes we grow apart. You really can't predict that. And you're very lucky if you grow together. It just happens that sometimes you grow apart. That's just life. You have to accept that. So if you went into a relationship knowing the origin and the disappearance of that relationship, it came together, so it must end. It's not going to go on forever. Not for lifetimes. This is not my soul partner. I'm going to be reincarnated with you till the end of the eon. That's obviously stupid. But the idea also, you'll understand the gratification. There's great joys in having a relationship, but also the danger of it as well. And eventually the escape from that clinging. If you go into it knowing the rules of the game, then you end up with much less suffering. It's the same with like being a monk or a nun. There's a gratification of being a monk or a nun. There's a danger of monastic life. And there's even the escape from monastic life, which is not identifying with being a monk or a nun at all. You can still wear the robes. You still keep all the rules. You never think, I am the monk. So going into it, knowing what you're getting into, I think is the key to success. There's a couple of questions from overseas, which I should address now. Actually, this is not overseas, it's just over the Swan River. It's south of the river. Shane from Fremantle. When I try to observe my reaction to sense pleasure, the desire seems to grow. So I'm trying to avoid things that I know create strong desire. Does this not develop the parami of renunciation? Desire doesn't seem to have subsided, though. It's a hard battle. It's a very good question. I think it's answered earlier on. Just by observing your reaction to sensory pleasure, just by being mindful of it, is not enough. Because the sensory pleasure still has a hold on you. The desire seems to grow. And that often happens. What you pay attention to seems to grow in intensity. The tension seems to feed it. So I'm trying to avoid things I know create strong desire, and that degree of avoidance, as we were saying earlier, is helpful, but it is superficial. It does develop the power of renunciation, but not to its fulfillment. You only know you've really renounced when you can walk away from it totally and it disappears. It's like the person who says, yeah, well, I've renounced smoking, but I just haven't given it up yet. And it's a hard battle. And the way, again, the escape, which we mentioned earlier, the Eightfold Path, get into such deep meditations that you have these jhanas, and then you find that you're not so interested in those things anymore. It's because you have another pleasure. And you just see these things are like a dirty old cloth, which people say is beautiful and white and clean and so wonderful. You have to change the way you look at life. And to do that you need, as I think one statement which you said, Chris, to really change the view of life you need the most almighty kick up your backside. And that is like the jhanas. They really just turn you, what's the Australian expression, arse over head or something. There's an old Australian expression, I forget. Don't say it, don't say it. Head over heels, I think, is the polite way. And Russell from Hawaii. How beneficial is reading the sutras by yourself and have a book with the sutras? They can be very inspiring sometimes, but sometimes it can be very hard to understand and confusing. Any comments, please? Yeah, it is very good to read the sutras yourself, so please do so. Sometimes it's very helpful to have them explained by someone who knows what they're talking about, not just a scholar, but someone who meditates as well. That's why we put these talks online, so you can get sort of like a senior experienced monk's explanation of these sutras. It really opens them up much more than you will be able to do by reading it by yourself. But the most important thing is please to meditate as well and get some deep meditations. If you have the sutras and you have your meditation, the two of them come together, then you really understand what the Buddha was saying. The meditation gives you the experience. The books, these are like the guidebooks to Paris, the guidebooks to London. You have your guidebook, you go to London, and you can actually understand what all these places are and their history and why they're there. If you just read the guidebook, you don't really understand London. If you just go there without a guidebook, you miss too much. You have the guidebook and you have the visiting, say, London. You've got the two together, you have a great trip and you really get lots of understanding. So sutras are the guidebook. The Lonely Planet Guide to Nibbana, written by the Buddha. And the going there is the meditation. Hope I don't get into trouble calling the sutras Lonely Planet Guide. But that's a very well-known set of books for travellers. Very good. Any other questions or comments? Okay. One for Anusha. You've got the hand up first of all. Yeah. You can't go yet. So, Chris, you've got to take the... Anusha, first of all, with the question. The next one is Cheng.
Is jhana the only way to get over sense pleasure? And till you get into that, do you just have to be careful?
You have to have a degree of renunciation to get into jhanas, but sometimes people just get into them anyway. So sometimes from experience, you see that people who are living in the world, they just press the letting go button, they get into a jhana and it changes their whole life. It helps. And as I gave a talk last Wednesday to the monks, I mentioned the pure mind. Developing a very pure mind, non-fault-finding, kind, generous, really good person. And that type of mind easily gets into jhanas. So one of the ways is developing the pure mind, and that's where the other factors of the Eightfold Path come in. Having precepts, but not keeping precepts like some Puritan, being afraid of making mistakes. But you have this really beautiful pure mind, which doesn't really want to say any bad words about anybody. Doesn't want to criticize, always sees extenuating circumstances. Like someone said last night, they were angry. How do I overcome anger? He said, if it's your boss, just think they're brain damaged, and your boss happens to be brain damaged, so give them a bit of a break. It's not really their fault, that's the best they can do. Give them have a pure mind, see the extenuating circumstances. And with such a pure mind, which is kind, forgiving, that type of mind easily gets into jhanas. Fault finding, controlling is just too much, too hard. So all those other factors of the Eightfold Path, they all come together in the jhanas, which means you're not blind anymore. So you can actually see what real happiness is. And people do it. That's amazing. All the years which I've been teaching, somebody asked me, well, are you teaching in vain, Ajahn Brahm? Do people actually get these jhanas? And they do. And sometimes at first it was surprising. This is a person with a wife, this is a person with a husband, they're young, they seem to be enjoying themselves. If you look deeper, it's people with very pure minds. They seem to be the ones who get the jhanas easy. I don't need to explain to you what a pure mind is, because that's something we all understand. A pure heart, pure mind. Okay, next question was from Cheng.
Just for curiosity, on this paragraph 18, if we truly just follow the sutta structure, to really fully understand this gratification, escape and all this, and then right up to able to abandon sensual pleasure, you're actually talking to a person who is really a non-returner, right?
No, not necessarily. If you understand the origin, the disappearance, the gratification, danger and escape, if you understand that, that is going to be a great cause for letting go. And at least it will make you, the understanding will make you a stream winner. So, just a stream winner. But you take that further, obviously, because once you get on that path, then you're on your way, and just see how far you get. But at least a stream winner.
And just that, this is just a comment.
Yeah.
It's for people like me who don't need convincing that we need jhana. It's quite boring to keep hearing about. Please get into jhana. What is this sense restraint? I think somehow, if we know that we try our best and we, like I said, pure mind and more relaxed, and no fever. Calming down the senses. I think once you get into the jhana, just get the structure of the sutta, it seems that the training of the sense restraint that when we talk about gradual training, it goes more than that once you get into stream winner, because then you really, really know how to abandon.
Indeed, yeah. So it says.
And I think the Sutta 122 is a very good example, I think, to say that how you go further, because the book's been printing about mindfulness, sense, walking here and there. I think we need it, yes. That's why we got monastery, where people can delegate to do, they want to renounce and go into jhana. Not that you can go into jhana, but what I mean is you go into a refinery of mind and heart. But when to really, really restrain your sensual pleasure, all this, I think there's a step further, and that step further, the Buddha had already told you, is go right into a stream winner, follow the Eightfold Path, and be a non-returner. Yeah. And I think this part of the teaching, people are not into it. People are just going on the sense restraint before jhana. Do we need jhana to do sense restraint? I get very bored.
Yeah. No, I know that was just an old question. Do you really need jhana? And you know my views on that. That's why I teach like this. It's actually, there's no way out other than going through the jhanas. It's just what happens when you abandon your desire for the senses. As I said, it's not something which you try and get. It's just something which happens. It's a sign on the path. It's a landscape. Yeah, it's a landmark of letting go. So the more you let go, the closer you get. So you have to do that. So that's all it really means. When this sutta was actually mentioning that in the pleasure he knows, which is something better. And that's also mentioned in other sutras as well. That you can't really sort of let go or even lessen the sensory desires without the experience of something more. So that's actually what this is teaching and why I teach like this. So restraint is okay, it's very important, it's lovely. But yes. Indeed you do. Indeed, yes. Very good. Yeah. Book knowledge is very good, but you also need to meditate as well. The two of them go together. Yeah. You need the microphone. We're getting late now, so this will be the last question.
Ajahn, what about the investigation of the law? Yeah.
The investigation of the law is basically all the Dhamma, is what we're doing here with the Dhamma class. So this is actually part of understanding what the Dhamma really is. But to be able to truly abandon those 5 hindrances, which I mentioned earlier, the way to abandon those 5 hindrances is by getting such a still mind, the jhanas, so those hindrances are fully abandoned. That's almost the task of the jhanas. After they are abandoned for a long time, then you can investigate the Dhamma, knowing that what you're actually seeing and perceiving is trustworthy. You're not being sold a dirty cloth as a white one. So that's why we have to investigate with the mind free from hindrances. Okay, so I know I have to go now because there is an interview at Bodhinyana Monastery at 4:45. I have to get there, so I have to rush off. So now we just pay respects to the Buddha, Dhamma and Sangha.